Okay, shall we get going, Dan? Yeah. Are you recording? Everything ready to go? Yeah, perfect. Well, good afternoon, everyone. Thank you for joining us for today's webinar about writing a funding application. My name's Claire. I work for Essex Cricket, and we're going to be joined a bit later on by Lee Monk from Active Essex. So we'll be doing this webinar between us. So if you could keep yourself muted, it just cuts down on the background noise. And if you have any questions, please put them into the chat box. And our fan will be going through those, and we'll hopefully have some time at the end to answer any questions. So today's webinar, we're going to go through building up your idea. So thinking about what it is that you want funding for, working through and being able to write a good application form. And then Lee's going to take us through where we might be able to find some funding in the current situation. So it's worth mentioning that applying for funding should be part of a wider fundraising drive. There are lots of different types of income and fundraising, and this should form part of a wider drive within the club. So we are going to go through a lot of information today, and I know it can seem a bit intimidating, a bit overwhelming, but don't forget that you can revisit the webinar, you can watch it again, and the slides will be available as well. So hopefully this will give you a step-by-step process for writing an application form, and it will become a little bit more manageable for you. So I just wanted to revisit the different types of funding that you might be thinking about applying for, revenue and capital funding. So revenue is really the funding to deliver your activities. So this might pay for your venue hire, some small scale equipment, and it could cover some coaching fees as well. And then capital funding is normally for a larger amount, so to update your facilities or to buy a large scale, normally a fixed piece of equipment. But in both cases, it's really useful to first of all think about what you actually need the funding for. And this could be called your idea or your concept, and then you will build it into your project. So before you even really start looking for funding, your starting point should be, what is my idea? And you should try and capture this in a statement if you can. This can then be built up and worked up into your project. And when we think about it as a project, your idea really becomes your concept. And I want to show an example here. So we want to get some funding for equipment for our Essex Cricket Club to set up a new female session to run alongside the boys session. So you'll see that this is quite a short, punchy statement, but already it tells us that this session will be new activity. We know that our target audience is females. We know where the project will run, so the geographical location. We know what the activity is, and we know what we're going to be spending the money on. So we've been very specific in quite a short paragraph there. And this is something I'd encourage you to do before you even start thinking or worrying about writing an application form. Get that idea down. So now you know what you need the funding for. Let's look at in more detail at writing the application form. So a typical application form is highly likely to be an online portal. If it's not a portal, it could be an online document where you have to enter information into certain fields. It's very rare nowadays that you'll get a Word document, sorry, as the application form. But sometimes you can request this if you need it. So it's therefore really important to think about who is going to be putting the information into the application form, because they're going to need some sort of computer literacy to be able to do this. I would recommend, and what I always do, is if it is an online portal or an online form, copy and paste the questions into a Word document. This means that you can write your draft, you can be checking the word count, you can be checking your spelling and your grammar as you go along. And then once it's ready, you copy and paste it into the online portal. So think about who is best to fill in the application form, and don't think that you need to do it all on your own. It could be that you share it out amongst the club committee and then you pull it together on that one Word document, and then one person just uploads it onto the online form. So the typical sections of an application form, you're going to need to put your introductory information. So this will be things like your address, your local authority. You might need to say how your club is constituted, how many members you've got, and you might need that brief paragraph, that concept that we've spoken about, to give an introduction to your project. You're going to need to tell the funder how you know your project is needed, or your evidence base. So it's key that you've done some background research and you've gathered some evidence before you start. You'll also need to tell them what you will do or what you're hoping to achieve with your project, the impact your project will have, including numbers. So it's wise to think about how many people you're going to have an impact on. They might also want to know what's going to happen at the end of your project, or the sustainability. And you'll always need to put your project budget. So how much money you want and how you're going to be spending that money. So it's worthwhile thinking about these typical sections and starting to gather any evidence or information that you need. So moving on then, what does a good application look like? And I'm going to bring these first two up together because I think these are by far the most important. So your project must meet all of the eligibility criteria, and it must also match with the aims and objectives of the funder. So if you don't meet these two, it's very unlikely that you will get any funding from this particular fund. You might be an excellent application form writer, you might be able to tell a beautiful story, but if you don't meet that criteria and the aims and objectives, it's just not going to work. So make sure you read through any guidance notes, read them once, and then double check them again before you get started. You should also make sure you've got a strong evidence base so that you're justifying why your project should get funding. So if we refer back to that initial project idea that we spoke about at the beginning, my evidence might be that I've got a waiting list of girls that want to play cricket. I might have done some research with local schools or local community groups who have told me that there is a demand for this session, or I might have evidence from the local authority or Sport England to support my project. So tell the funder how you know that your project is needed in your area. Your application should be smart throughout, and I am going to go into more detail about this a little bit later on. Your writing should be clear and appropriate, and make sure you don't go over any word limits that the funder might have said. Make sure you're giving them all the information that they require. So if they want to see a copy of your safeguarding policy or your constitution, anything like that, make sure it's in the right format and it's attached with it. I know it sounds pretty basic, but make sure you're answering the question. So double check, refer back to the question, and make sure you're meeting the requirements. And you're not just telling a lovely story, but not actually answering the question. And there should be consistency across your whole application. And this is particularly important if you've got 2 or 3 or 4 people writing different sections. So it's always worthwhile someone giving it a final proofread and making sure that things like acronyms or jargon, that they're used in the same manner throughout the whole application. So what does being smart mean? Well, your project should be specific, measurable, achievable, realistic, and time-bound. And remembering this will really help you write a good application form. So we're going to look through some examples now, and there is going to be a lot of text on the page. So don't forget, if you don't manage to read it all through, that you can revisit this afterwards. And I think it will be useful for you to refer back to when you come to writing a funding application as well. So how can we be specific? I'll just give you a couple of seconds just to read through what's on the screen. So if we look at the top example, something that I wouldn't suggest is a good example. It gives no detail. I mean, we can read this and we don't really know what it means and what the project's going to look like. But then compare it with the paragraph at the bottom. Here, we're not waffling. It's a bit longer, but we're giving some specific information. We're saying it's going to be 1 hour of cricket. We're saying where it's going to be and who we're going to target, those 14 to 16-year-olds. So try and think specifically about your project and capture it in that succinct way without going on for too long. And then measurable. How are you going to measure the success of your project? So give some specific details. If we look at the top example, it's too general. It's saying we're going to improve health and fitness. It doesn't say how or whose health and fitness. But compare this with the bottom example. It's really specifically telling us how the project will be measured, that it's going to be 25 participants, what regular participation is, and that they're going to measure success by undertaking a participant survey at the start, the middle, and the end of the project. So really think about how you can tell if your project will be a success and be specific about how that will be measured. And then I'm going to put achievable and realistic together because they're quite similar really. And again, it comes down to saying what you're going to do in a specific, in a short way. So don't overestimate your impact. If we look at that top example, will the project really raise the standard of cricket across the whole of Essex? Is this something that's achievable? Probably not. Definitely not realistic. So make sure your project is something that you can deliver. Be honest and tell a realistic story. It can be quite easy to think, I really need to oversell myself. I need to make myself look good if we're going to be successful in this application. But you want to end up with a project you can actually deliver, something that's achievable and realistic. And then finally, time bound. So your project needs a timescale. It needs a clear beginning and it needs a clear end. And this top example is really far too vague. It's saying it's going to take place throughout the year with no idea when that is. Could be January, July, October, we don't know. But compare it to the bottom example. They've specifically said 5 events between July and September, and that the project's going to continue until October 2020. So give more detail and set yourself timescales. So let's have a bit of a recap. I've got a few slides now that are going to help us think about what we should and shouldn't be doing when we're writing a funding application. Again, this could be something useful that you revisit when you come to sit down to write your application. It might help you out. So what should we do? Make sure you're reading the guidance and make sure you're checking your answers against the guidance and against assessment criteria. Wait until you've got all of your details. Don't start too soon. Don't go over the word limit. We've spoken about keeping our projects smart. Always assume that the funder doesn't know you, so tell them the story from the beginning, give them a bit of background, and get someone else to read your application before you submit it, to check that it flows nicely and it's consistent all the way through. So what shouldn't we do? Don't just start writing without having that clear idea. And this comes back to our project concept that we spoke about at the beginning, that short paragraph. Get this down first. Don't go over the word limit, but similarly, don't go under it either. If the word limit's 500, don't just write 100 words. Use it as a guide. Don't leave it to the last minute and expect to produce a high quality application. Don't write it on your own. And if you are going to use jargon and acronyms, make sure you explain what these are. Don't submit your application without doing a spell check and a grammar check. So again, I recommended that you copy and paste things in, use Word first, and this will allow you to do that spell check and grammar check. Don't waffle on and don't repeat your information. If you're answering it in one section of the application, don't then repeat yourself further down the line. And then Sport England gives some further advice. It's the same message, it's just written slightly differently. So Sport England want you to think about whether they are the right funder for you. So do you fit with their aims and objectives? Assume they know nothing. Don't waste your words, so don't go over the word limit. Think about how many people you're going to have an impact on with this project. Make sure you've done the maths with your budget so that it adds up. You're likely to need a referee, so have someone in mind that can speak on your behalf, that knows you and knows your project. Check that you've got everything, and then before you submit, make sure you read it again. And then I wanted to include this advice from SportEd, because this has been written in light of the current situation. So it's more important than ever to focus on funds where you're going to be successful, because there are so many more people at the moment needing to apply for funding. So I want to highlight a couple of things here. If you need recovery costs, you might need to wait for opportunities for this. So things might not be available at the moment, but hopefully things will come further down the line. And if you're thinking about offering new services in light of the current situation, make sure these fit in with the aims and objectives of your club. And if they don't, perhaps you might need to link with another charity that's got more experience in that area. So that's all from me at the moment. I'm going to hand over to Lee now, who's going to look a bit more in detail about how you can find appropriate funding.
Thanks, Kurt. Some really useful information there, and it's applicable to all kind of grant funding application forms that you'll apply for. So I'm just going to take you through some existing funding opportunities and where to look, and then happy to answer any questions after as well. So there are thousands of different funders, over 10,000 grant-giving charitable trusts who typically give money or funding to registered charities. Small and large grants are available, and it's worth bearing in mind at the moment that a number of funders have responded to COVID-19, and many regular or rolling deadline funding opportunities have temporarily changed their criteria. So many funders out there at the moment are supporting groups and organisations who can demonstrate that they're working with people most vulnerable in society because of the COVID-19 pandemic. So in terms of where to look, thanks Claire. There are a number of different funding tools out there available for you to take a look at, the majority of which are free. So Active Essex have a funding tool, as do London Sport. On there you can cut and slice different to your project needs to help that search easier for you. And then also there's other organisations such as Funding Central. Charity Excellence Framework is a free fundraising tool which has over 600 funds on there. And there's also Grants Online and London Community Response. They're typically a great place to start once you've got your idea of what you want to do. Next slide, please. Now, Sport England are, I'm sure many of you will be aware, the biggest funder for sport and physical activity in terms of grassroots. Now, the free opportunities on the screen are currently paused, but I think it's really important to make you all aware that these opportunities do exist, as Claire mentioned, around not wasting time applying for grants that perhaps don't suit you. These are a one of your best chance of applying for and receiving funding from a funder. So the Community Emergency Fund is currently paused, and that's due to them having 11,000 applications come in over the past couple of months, and that is for organisations who are experiencing short-term financial hardship because of ceasing of operations due to coronavirus. Now, if you've not previously applied for this in round one, it will reopen. It was initially a 20 million pot of funding, but due to demand, Sport England have added another 15 million to this. So I think they've got about 1,000 more applications to assess, so it's currently on pause. And once they've got that last 1,000 in, then I think there will be about 8 or 9 million left in that pot. So if you are still experiencing financial hardship due to no cricket going on at the moment, and you haven't applied for that already, then do take a look at that. It should open in the next month, I'd say. Also, Sport England have a small grant scheme, which is you can apply for typically any project involved in increasing people's sport and physical activity behaviour. So a good one for cricket clubs to take a look at after today. It's currently paused and it's expected to reopen around mid-July, so take a look at that. And then also in terms of a capital fund, the Community Asset Fund will help support sport and physical activity projects, buildings and fixed capital assets up to £150,000 on there as well. So all the guidance for all of them is still available, despite them temporarily being on hold due to a lot of their kind of admin support going into that emergency response. Also, recently, Sport England have announced that they've put another £1 million into combating the impact of the coronavirus by match funding money raised by sports clubs and community activity groups through crowdfunder. Now, for those of you that don't know how crowdfunding works, it's a simple concept that you upload your idea or project to the crowdfunder website. So it might be help save Essex cricket survive the COVID-19 pandemic, as an example. You then set your target of what your funding goal is, and then you'd help spread the word, get that out to as many people as possible to help support your project or what you're looking for funds for. And then if your goal is hit, the people that have pledged to support your idea or your project will get something in return for the funding that they have pledged. And that can be as simple as a free session to the club, or a net session, or I think some have given kind of freebies with their club spending on as a thank you for supporting their pledge. And Sport England are match funding organisations up to £10,000 at the moment, so it will help your pledges of money go a lot further if you're looking to grab some funds through non-grant funding. So do take a look at that as well. That's available now. Also available, the National Lottery Community Fund. Now on there they have a small grants fund similar to the Sport England Small Grants Fund. The Sport England Small Grants Fund is a £7 million a year pot. The awards for all is an £80 million annual pot. So there are opportunities for sport and physical activity organisations and clubs to apply through this as well. And typically the National Lottery and community funds want to fund projects where people are in the lead, and that means there's been an element of co-design by the people who stand to benefit from the project. So as much consultation you can do, membership surveys, making sure there's an evidence base for people to want this to happen, you stand a good chance of that. Now again, this fund, they are focusing on funding organisations supporting people most vulnerable due to COVID. So a good example of how a cricket club might apply for this at the moment would be if you were setting up a local food bank or something like that, which I know a number of clubs across Essex have already done, which is excellent. Thanks, Claire. Something we do have in our gift at Active Essex, and I believe London Sport will have something similar as well at the moment, is our satellite club funding. Now, if you are looking to work with 11 to 19-year-olds and want to provide positive experiences for young people and to change their behaviour towards a more physically active lifestyle, we do have funding available. Now, projects we're looking to fund must target inactive young people or regularly inactive, and we're also looking to fund projects that specifically target one of these groups, and that is women and girls, low socioeconomic groups, pain communities, young people with disabilities, or young people suffering from or are at risk of mental health issues. Now, we're again quite flexible, so we'd ideally want this to be sustained long term, so we'll fund projects for 6 months plus as a standard, but we'll also consider 6-week trials for new clubs or ideas as well. So we're quite flexible, and how to apply for that is actually a conversation. So we want to hear from organisations such as yourselves. And again, as long as there's a level of evidence that this is needed by young people you're targeting, and you can show that, then there's a good opportunity for us to be able to support that. We're also interested in exploring virtual club delivery models, and can also accept projects that are on hold until the easing of lockdown and social distancing. So yeah, so there's a good opportunity there if you're looking at that age group or one of them focus groups as well. And I said London Sport will have a similar remit, but they may have slightly different criteria or a way of working or administering that fund as well. So do check that out. Thanks, Claire. One fund that I'd say everyone on the call today must apply for is the Magic Little Grants Fund. It's for groups, charities, clubs, community groups, etc. to apply for up to £500. Their prime aim is improving physical health of their participants, inspire them to participate in sport or exercise, and it's a really simple, easy form that you can use some of Claire's top tips from earlier as a tester. So do take a look at that one. It comes with a free membership for local giving as well. Like I say, it's a really simple one, so do take a look at that. It's available now until the 31st of October as well. Thanks, Claire. Finally, some other opportunities to make you aware of: the Essex Community Foundation and London Community Foundation both typically have a grant available up to £10,000, which loosely aims to improve people's lives. There will be some specific criteria added to that, and also it's worth checking on their websites, as both foundations will manage other funds and also local grants. So it's worth always keep checking back on the website and subscribing to any prompts that they send out as well. Final other funding opportunity that we're aware of currently is through the Tesco Bags for Help scheme. So your green tokens as you leave the supermarket. Now, you can apply to be one of the organisations supported through that scheme at any time. It's currently a rolling deadline, but we've had them come in contact with us recently to say that they're desperate for projects from Whittam, in Tiptree and Lakeside. So our club in them areas, they're looking actively for projects to support. And that doesn't mean that other areas aren't. You can apply for that any time. So it's definitely worth having a look at that. It's open now, and then if you are accepted or your idea is accepted, I think it's £500 if you come third, £1,000 if you're second, and £2,000 if you're first. So yeah, another good opportunity there. And just a couple of final, thanks, Claire. Just a couple of last minute plugs. We have a support for the sport and physical activity sector page on our Active Essex website. On there we've collated all of the latest guidance around supporting clubs and organisations, online education, some top tips on keeping your club and organisation running during this time, how to keep in touch with your members. And finally also, thanks Claire, from Club Matters. So if you're not aware of Club Matters, it's a one-stop shop for clubs, groups and organisations involved in delivery of sport and physical activity. On there's lots of practical resources and guidance around how to help your clubs grow, develop and become more sustainable. So do take a look at that, especially now as we look to come out of lockdown. And then also for any club looking at their current legal structure, or would like more information or advice around the different options for club structure, then we have free workshop on Monday the 15th of June, 6 to 8. So to look onto that, just email me. That's it from me. Sorry, that's a bit of a whistle-stop tour. My email address is there, so if you've got any questions now, happy to answer or happy to pick up after today's session as well.
Okay. Well, I'll just move on to our last slide. You can see our contact up there, so please feel free to get in touch with your relevant representative. Arfan, are there any questions?
Just a couple of quick ones. First of all, that was fantastic. Both Claire and Lee. Praveed just very kindly asked if the slides can be shared to the group, so they can refer to them at any time. So we would do that. There we go. For you, Claire. Andrew, we are struggling to get funding for additional coaching to help with our girls and junior cricket sections. Grateful for any suggestions. I suppose this is coaching funding.
Yeah, so again, it just comes down to finding a fund that will give you the money for that. So checking the criteria for things, looking out for specifically funds that target women. So perhaps keeping an eye on websites such as Women in Sport, information that they might be putting up there about specific female and girls funding. It can be hard, it can be challenging, but there's hopefully something out there. And if you can't get it from a funding application, perhaps it's something that you can use one of the other platforms for, such as the crowdfunding.
Brilliant. I'm not sure if Graham put this for everybody, just some help, but he's asked if there's any news. I think probably maybe Lee can help, but is there any news on Give to Local? Can't find a definitive support for its validity. So if anyone has experience, please let us know.
I'm not aware of Give to Local. I'd have to follow that up separately if that's okay.
Of course, no problems, and that was from Graham Pryke. Just a couple ones just to wrap up for me, Claire. I know you touched on in your presentation with the no-nos, but what are your sort of 3 or 4 favourite no-nos in regards to when doing applications?
For me personally, I would say don't go over the word limit, because some funders will only chop out the first 200 words if it's a 200 word limit, and anything else you've written could be lost. A bugbear for me are things like spelling mistakes and grammatical mistakes and referring to something as an acronym in one place and not in another place. So just little things like that, and answer the question.
Yeah, and finally, just around deadlines, and we're all obviously busy, and it's volunteers that do them, and so it gets down to the last hour. But is there a sort of rule around when you should start planning and getting that application in time?
Yeah, well, keep an eye on when things are coming out and start planning as soon as you can. I would always give yourself a deadline of a week before the actual deadline, so that you can give it a final proofread, check you've got all the information. You might want to get guidance either from us or Active Essex or London Sport as well, so build that into the time. Always tell a little white lie to people that are writing it with you, and tell them that the deadline is earlier than it actually is as well, so that you can make sure you've got everything ready.
Brilliant. And just a final one, Lee.
Sorry,
go on.
Just a piece of advice on that is, I'd say you as clubs shouldn't be chasing particular funding streams. It should all be about what you're looking to achieve as a club. Make sure you have an up-to-date club development plan or a business plan, so you and your committee know exactly what you're looking to achieve, and also just keeping an ear to the ground around what funding is available, and then what parts of your business plan or club development plan will be able to be funded through them particular funding streams. So just
that's
a top tip from me.
That's brilliantly, because ironically, you've probably stolen Dan's thunder, because we were talking offline around future webinars, and we discussed business plan and development plan and implementing the business plan in there. So on that note, I'm going to hand it back to Dan.
Yeah, thank you very much, Lee and Claire, for today. Really informative webinar, one not just for now, but for future use for clubs that can make use of that. And again, please make use of your relevant county contacts on the screen there as well that can really help you and shape some ideas. There's some great examples from clubs at the moment who are accessing crowdfunding, space saver, and using their local sort of community groups as well in terms of activating small grants around to help them. But thank you very much for taking the time. Again, please stay in touch, stay safe, and we'll be back soon. Thanks very much. Bye.